They stole her spotlight, her fortune, and even her husband's final goodbye.
Porizkova posted this emotional video in 2020, 8 months after her husband of 30 years, Cars frontman Rick Ocasek, died suddenly.
One day, she was the face of Estée Lauder. The next, she was grieving, broke, and shamed for aging. But instead of vanishing, Paulina did something no one expected. She picked up the mic and shattered the silence. What happens when the forgotten refuse to stay quiet?
Not only had you lost this man that you loved, but then he used language that was so brutal. You had abandoned him.
The story didn't begin with ambition. It started with a borrowed camera and a curious friend. Paulina Porizkova wasn't dreaming of fashion houses or flashing lights. She was helping her friend test out a few shots with an old Instamatic pocket camera. The friend, obsessed with photography, was the one with the plan. She took the pictures not to showcase Paulina, but to get feedback on her camera work. When she sent the photos to a local modeling scout in Lund, she expected notes about framing and lighting. The scout, on the contrary, did not look at the technique, but at the quiet presence of the girl in the frame.
Scout in the city where we lived in Lund in Sweden to ask what she thought of her photography. Like, oh, how do I become a fashion photographer? And the lady got back to her saying, yeah, photography, schmotography. Who's the girl? How old is she? And how tall is she?
There was a jerk in the lens. It was no longer about the photo. It became about the girl, caught off guard, not yet aware she was being seen. Paulina did not suspect that one afternoon would turn her life in a new direction. Just years earlier, she'd been stuck in a country where no one escaped, not yet aware she was being seen. When Paulina was just 3 years old, her parents fled communist Czechoslovakia, leaving her behind in the care of her grandmother. For 5 years, she remained there, tucked away behind the Iron Curtain, while her parents fought for asylum in Sweden. Only international pressure finally reunited them. At 8, she boarded a plane to a new country, almost to a new family, and to parents she barely recognized. The silence of those years lingered even in freedom. By the time she turned 15, Paulina was living in Sweden, speaking the language, going to school, but still carrying a silence no one could name. That's when a few snapshots taken on a whim changed everything. Within months, she was on a flight to Paris, booked by Elite, still a child, suddenly a model. At 15, Paulina was signed by Elite, fashion's most dominant agency at the time. Now, out of nowhere, she was on a plane to Paris. Paris wasn't an ambition. It was inevitable. That's where the runways were, where the designers watched, where careers were made. Elite didn't hesitate. They put her in front of the right people, and Paulina didn't flinch. The world saw beauty. She still saw uncertainty. But things moved fast. From the start, Elite saw what others would later chase. Within a year, she appeared in French Glamour, then Vogue, and at 19, she was on the cover of Sports Illustrated, not because she wanted to be famous, but because the camera didn't want to let her go. For nearly a decade, Estée Lauder had kept her front and center until 1995, when they quietly moved on. The phone didn't stop all at once, but the spaces between calls grew longer. By her late 30s, the offers had slowed. By her 40s, they were gone. It wasn't that Paulina had changed. She still had the bone structure, the poise, and the camera presence. But the industry had shifted. What once celebrated her elegance now sought something newer, edgier, younger. Age wasn't graceful. It was a liability. For nearly a decade, Estée Lauder had kept her front and center until 1995, when they quietly moved on. She was aging, and in modeling, that's the one thing you're never allowed to do. And the replacements came fast. Kate Moss arrived like a storm, raw, rebellious, everything the industry suddenly craved. Her waifish frame and grunge allure made Paulina's elegance look almost old-fashioned overnight. Gisele Bündchen, all sun-kissed curves and youthful charm, the Brazilian bombshell who seemed to inherit every spotlight Paulina once held. The same magazines that once called her timeless now acted like she had an expiration date. It wasn't just the industry that moved on. It was the world. Inside their New York brownstone, her marriage to Rick Ocasek was quietly coming apart. The closeness was lost. The conversations became brief. He had once sung to her. Now he scarcely noticed when she entered the room. They shared a home, but not a life. Still, they never made it official. Paulina believed in loyalty and staying, even when things got hard. She raised their 2 sons while Rick toured. She paused her career to support his. She believed that love could still be honored, even when stretched thin. In 2017, after nearly 3 decades, she finally announced their separation. It wasn't bitter. There was no legal divorce, no dramatic fallout. She stayed by his side as he recovered from surgery. She brought him food, managed his medications, tended to him in silence. She didn't walk away, not even when the marriage had already ended emotionally. In 2019, Paulina found Rick dead in their home, as he had passed in his sleep. But there was still more to take. Rick had changed his will just weeks before his death and removed Paulina entirely. In legal terms, he claimed that she had abandoned him.
COVID shut down the world and I was grieving and I was heartbroken. So I, like a drowning person, was tossing out these little messages in the bottle of like, please help, I'm drowning.
She wasn't left with nothing, but what was missing couldn't be measured in dollars. It wasn't the financial blow that crushed her. It was the rewriting of their story, the invalidation of decades. She had given up modeling campaigns for him and stayed off the runways so he could remain in the spotlight. And now, when it mattered most, her name had been scrubbed away. The media response was swift and often unkind. Some headlines questioned her grief or painted her as a former icon undone by circumstance. The headlines followed like vultures. Paulina cries poor. From supermodel to widow with nothing. The same outlets that once glamorized her now reduced her pain to spectacle. She later clarified that while she had no access to liquid funds at the time, she still owned significant assets, including a share of the home, and eventually secured a fair legal settlement. And during that time in her life, Paulina felt invisible, unseen by the industry that once adored her, forgotten by the man she gave her youth to, mocked by a culture that couldn't understand why a former supermodel was publicly weeping. But through that fog of betrayal and loss, something strange happened. She didn't disappear. She endured. The Paulina that rose through the ranks of Vogue and Estée Lauder had been a symbol. This Paulina, a widow, a mother, a woman with no script to follow, was something far more to the system: honesty and truth. The world expected the aged one to fade. Instead, she strengthened her voice and was more visible than ever. It didn't begin on a runway. It started on a phone screen a while, even before her husband died. Instagram, of all places, became her new stage. But she wasn't selling anything, not makeup, lingerie, or perfection. She was offering the truth. Wrinkles, tears, under-eye bags. Stories about betrayal, aging, grief, and surviving when the world turns away. What started as vulnerable posts became a movement. She gave aging a face, a voice. She showed women over 50 that they didn't have to shrink. She launched #sexy has no expiration date, a phrase that struck a nerve across generations. Thousands of women echoed it. Celebrities reposted her. The same media that once mocked her pain now quoted her courage. And then came her memoir, No Filter, a raw, unflinching journey through beauty, loss, and rebirth. It wasn't a glossy autobiography, it was a scalpel. She cut through the myths, told the hard truths, and invited others to do the same. She didn't reclaim power with a photo shoot. She did it with scars showing, her voice steady, and no retouching. Paulina Porizkova, once discarded by an industry obsessed with youth, returned not as a muse, but as a movement. At 59, in an act almost unheard of, Estée Lauder called her back. The same brand that once made her the highest-paid model of her time now welcomed her wrinkles. She wasn't a throwback. She was a message. They were reintroducing her as the future. Paulina didn't return to pose. She returned to speak about aging, about beauty, about the courage it takes to be seen. She had become one of the leading voices of a cultural shift, a woman who helped push the conversation around aging into the mainstream, not by campaigning, but by exposing herself, honestly, fearlessly. And through it all, she remained what she always had been, a beautiful woman, visible, desired, still here.